everyone, to the Money Path. We have a very special program for you today. We're going to be speaking about the events that took place over the weekend in Venezuela and how it pertains to the oil market. And to help me break it all down, I have Fernando Valle. He is the head of energy at Hedgeye, who's joining me on the show. Fernando, Happy New Year and welcome to the program. I have to ask you, we see service-related companies right now, Halliburton, Baker Hughes, the refiners like Valero, they are popping right now off of what took place in Venezuela. In your opinion, do you think that this is a knee-jerk reaction or it's the real reaction?
Well, Happy New Year, Todd. Happy to be here. I think it's a knee-jerk reaction and one that's very much in keeping with the market's behavior over the past 12 months. But when we see power vacuums in major oil-producing countries, not that Venezuela is any longer a major oil-producing country, but it was, we typically actually see production fall. Just think of Libya or Iran and all the other, or Iraq for that matter. You want to control the oil fields in order to control the country. And so if there are different factions within Venezuela vying for power, they're going to target that infrastructure, which is already held together by string and gum, is not really in great shape to begin with. Just remember, about a year and a half ago, it was producing only 500,000 barrels a day. So altogether, the short-term risk is that we produce less in Venezuela and we get fewer exports, not that we produce more. And so we think it's a knee-jerk reaction. We still have to see how we are going to stabilize Venezuela and give the confidence for these companies to actually go back into the country and put in the capital necessary to raise production.
Right. And we'll get into that. But right now, the White House is talking about actually halting exports. And like you mentioned, there's still production that's taking place in Venezuela. I would imagine eventually those supply tanks will fill up. So that would then lead Venezuela to have to halt production. What is the downside risk, though, to the oil market if that does occur?
It's not significant. Venezuela is now only at 900,000 barrels a day. They probably export close to 400,000 barrels a day. So it's less than 0.5% of total oil production as far as their exports, less than 1% for their full production. So it wouldn't have a meaningful impact. And the challenge is, even before you fill those tanks, Todd, Venezuela oil is so heavy, so difficult to move that you actually have to import light oil to blend it with that oil. And if you stop that, it already halts production fairly quickly. So again, like I said, it's really a downside risk immediately on production in Venezuela, which would be good for oil prices, bad for these companies that had a knee-jerk reaction. But nonetheless, it's going to be fairly insignificant in the macro terms.
So, speaking of the heavy crude variety that is coming out of Venezuela, which is more valuable, though? I mean, is it that heavy sour crude, or is it the light shale barrels that are being exported here out of the United States? I mean, if you had to pick the two, which one would you rather have if you're an oil producer?
It's a good question, and it's a confusing one for most folks right now. On an absolute basis, light oil is more valuable than heavy oil. So if you look at heavy oil grades like Mexico's Maya or Canada's Western Canadian Select, they trade at $8 and $15 discounts to Brent, which is a light oil grade, respectively. That's because it's much easier to process light oil into refined products than heavy oil. The difficulty with shale specifically, but a lot of light oils, is that what we call the inherent yield. If you don't do anything else, just use a basic distillation unit. Light oil produces more gasoline than diesel relative to heavy oil. Heavy oil will produce more diesel. The margins for diesel today are in the mid 20s, whereas gasoline, they're in the $17 per barrel. So there's a dearth of heavy oil. And because most of the growth over the past 10 years has been US shale, which is very light. So in order to balance what we call the refiner's crude diet, we've been lacking the heavy blends. And so there's a gap in that market. But overall, light oil is more valuable.
What will it take for one of the oil company, the big three? I know Chevron has an operation in Venezuela now, but say an Exxon, Conoco, even get a Halliburton involved. What would it take for them to commit hundreds of millions of dollars to produce that heavy sour crude out of Venezuela?
I think that's the billion-dollar question, because it's really around stability. We have other places like Argentina, for example, that where it's been difficult to get majors to commit significant capital. They've been putting in some capital, but it's very small, really a toehold in the country. But they haven't committed a lot of capital because there's no certainty on the freedom of movement of that capital. So I think freedom of movement, safety of their employees. No one wants to come in and out of the country to go rescue their employees as they've had in the past. And
Mm.
then you mentioned Exxon and Conoco. Conoco specifically is a big creditor for Venezuela. So I think before they moved forward, they would have to settle on the expropriation contracts. Exxon also has some claims, but Conoco has been more pressing on those. So I think all three of those are requirements, and that could take years.
Years. Wow. So, well, that's not good because the reaction today on Wall Street seems to be that this is going to happen probably by next week. But so that's going to take some time. But what about the rest of the countries in the region? You're from Brazil. Brazil is an oil producer. So is Colombia. What kind of an impact can we expect in the oil market in those other countries in the event, say, the United States decides to try a regime change there?
Yeah, I think the big takeaway from here is that the US is going to be a lot more involved in the Americas again. And Maduro ideologically is closer to Gustavo Petro in Colombia and to Lula in Brazil, both of which are facing re-election this year. In the past, there's been, in Brazil at least, I'm less privy to this in Colombia, but in Brazil, there's been talks about Lula using Venezuela to funnel money in and out of his campaign. Obviously, without Maduro, that becomes a lot more difficult. You've also had issues of Venezuelan refugees going into both countries that have been negative for the incumbents. So if that happens again, all of those could weigh on the re-election of Gustavo Petro and Lula, again, both later this year, both leftists, and something that Trump is, with the $20 billion to Argentina, with Maduro, it seems like he's very keen on realigning Latin America to be more US leaning and less aligned with China and Russia. So we have the resources. It depends on how we're going to use that soft or hard power, depending on how it is.
So, other than Brazilian sugar, it seems like the most prized commodity is oil in that region. What do you think the president sees or what he is envisioning down the line that is causing us to? I get the regime change, I get Maduro's a bad guy, I get all of that. But at the end of the day, though, it is all about oil. So, what is he seeing that the rest of the country is not seeing right now? I mean, are we running into a shortage of oil, do you believe? Because everything I'm reading is that we have an oversupply of oil. But what do you think?
I think it's less about oil, and I think it's more about geopolitics
Mm.
and the midterms. Now, consider, for example, that Venezuela is the biggest supplier, if not the largest supplier of a wide shot of Cuba's energy. Marco Rubio is Cuban. The Cuban vote is very decisive especially in South Florida and other states where they could grow. So all of these in a midterm year. At the same rate, Russia has been very influential within Caracas for a very long time. In fact, the last time Maduro faced this level of scrutiny, he was reported to have fled to Moscow ahead of being captured, and this time he couldn't. So it impacts a blow on Russia as well, and their hold a stronghold in the Americas. And lastly, China. China has in the past done loans for oil and essentially barter agreements with Venezuela, where they would export their oil and get things like televisions and other manufactured goods into Venezuela. And now you're essentially restricting that for China. And again, there's a desire for this heavy oil. It's not as valuable as light oil, but there's still a desire for it to help balance that crude diet. And now you're restricting in one fell swoop. You're shifting the politics of the continent. You're getting some votes in the midterm from the Cuban contingent and other Caribbean countries and Venezuelans as well in the U.S. And then you're hurting Russia and China. It's a trifecta here.
Yeah, and I understand that. The with oil and you have the right now, I believe I understand Maria Gillespie Dreyfus. She comes on the show every once in a while. She's a board member for ExxonMobil, and she has said that humans are now, I think, actually consuming over 120 million barrels of oil a day, and we're just a little over that. We're pumping that amount out of the ground each day. What are your forecasts showing you? Because just 10 years ago, we were maybe in the 80 to 90 million barrel range. It seems that oil consumption continues to elevate and grow at an exceptional rate right now. Are your forecasts showing that that's going to continue through the rest of this century? And if that is the case, the second question is, where are we going to keep finding all of this oil?
Well, the bad news is, yes, we're going to keep growing oil demand and oil and natural gas liquids because if you consider energy consumption, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, excluding South Africa, the average inhabitant there consumes less energy than a U.S. refrigerator. So, in order to improve the standard of living in Africa, but not just Africa, Brazil, China, India, just in there, you have nearly 3 billion people, Bangladesh, Pakistan, all of those folks, if they just consume marginally more to raise their standards of living, which is air conditioning, more protein in their diet, sometimes it's sanitation, as basic as that, potable water, all of those require energy. And to do that, we're going to consume more oil. Even your EVs, they're going to consume more oil. It takes 10 times as much ore to build an EV than it does an internal combustion engine. And all of that ore is mined with diesel. And the plastic in the car is oil. So all of that requires oil. It's not going away anytime soon. As far as where we're going to find it, today, we already have significant finds. Now, that doesn't mean that we do for the next 30, 40 years. What we don't have is a high enough oil price to get production there. So we're going to need to see higher oil prices to enable, for example, what we call a tier 3 acreage in the US to be profitable, or for Canada to resume growing their production. There are a lot of resources in Canada, for example. We probably need 70, if not 80, $85 to go in and build out Venezuela, assuming we have stable politics there. And we need that price that essentially is going to take countries like Colombia and Mexico, who have said, we're not interested in producing oil anymore. We're just going to produce what we have and then stop. At $85, $90 a barrel, I think they're going to revisit that. So we need higher prices in order to get oil. But right now, at least for the next 10 to 20 years, we probably have enough oil discovered. Of course, you're going to start looking for new oil much before that. But we just need higher prices.
Higher prices, but that's the problem with a greater supply, oversupply. It's hard to manage to get these prices higher unless there's a few Cat 5 hurricanes or some type of a terrorist attack. It's hard to believe that we will be seeing prices elevated anytime soon. What's your belief, though? I mean, as we have an administration that's clearly pro energy, but realistically, though, I mean, do you believe we're going to see that $85 price per barrel anytime soon?
No, I am relatively bullish from the $60 a barrel levels today because the US, China, Europe, lots of countries around the world are talking about stimulating fiscally, stimulating monetarily. And when you get that kind of pressure from governments, it's nearly impossible for you not to see an increase in demand, right? If that's sustainable or not, because of all the debt that these governments are taking, is a different question. But in the near term, I would argue that that is inflationary, that is for oil prices, that will stimulate more demand. Over the medium term, say 12, 18, 24 months, it's hard to see that being a sustainable path. I think when you look at consumers, it's often talked about in the US K-shaped economy. That's probably true globally as well. Or we can talk about real estate being a huge issue still globally in China and the US and Europe. All of those are big headwinds that will have to get solved. In order to get sustainable growth in demand, we need to see household formation happening again, demographic growth in developed markets, not decelerating. I mean, even China and India, they're not declining, but they're decelerating very quickly. And so, and why is that? I mean, I have two small children. I can tell you, childcare is very expensive. Housing is very expensive. Healthcare is very expensive. Once you have a reduction in those costs, call it a rebalancing, then you could see more demand. Oil and natural gas have been hugely deflationary over the past 10 years. I mean, we are at $60 Brent. When I started covering oil in 2010, 15 years ago, our long-term oil price was $80 real.
Wow.
That is 120, 130 today. That's a $50 gap or
Right.
more. Sorry, that's a $60, $60 to $70 gap, a 50% discount. I mean, natural gas, our real price was four to 450. We're $4 sustainably today, 15 years later. So it just gives you a notion of just how deflationary energy has been. Everything else has just been massively inflationary.
How relevant is OPEC at this point? I mean, is the market, in other words, what's more powerful or influential right now? What's happening in Venezuela or an OPEC reaction?
So I think OPEC is really just Saudi and the UAE, and then to an extent, Russia as their interests align or misalign. So I think it's still very relevant. Um, and I don't think any of these things are happening in isolation. You can see about the kingdom of Saudi Arabia raising production even as oil prices were low.
Hmm.
Right after Trump visited Riyadh in May of this year, I was actually there when he was leaving. And so I don't think these are isolated facts. I think Trump has an understanding with Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, and it goes into holding oil prices low as long as they can, and probably in exchange for protection, military sales, pressure on Iran. Again, there are rumors today that the Ayatollah is considering fleeing to Moscow. So all of those are intertwined events. And again, if the Ayatollah is fleeing to Moscow, it shows you just how tenuous the relationship is between Saudi and Russia. So OPEC plus could be OPEC minus very soon.
That's great. So, the final question for you then. So, what is your playbook right now? I mean, say over the next 30 to 90 days. I mean, we have today's reaction, clearly, like you said, knee-jerk reaction, but realistically, going forward, because of the instability in Venezuela, do you see just further downside risk for oil prices?
No, I think again the downside risk uh, is actually potentially more upside risk because uh, I think production could come offline because of
Hmm.
that power vacuum that we talked about.
Yep.
I would actually consider being long on the oil side again. At Hedgeye, we think we're going through what we call quad one, which is growth accelerating in the first quarter. And so on top of that, if you do have some loss of barrels, I don't think it's that meaningful in from Venezuela, but if you have some loss of barrels, that helps. That helps oil prices as well. And then lastly, you've had a lot of capex. I won't say cuts, but rationalization of capex for U.S. shale. So I think you're going to see growth decelerating or potentially flatlining, which again will be positive for oil prices. And I think that's good for the higher quality shale names as well. We still like natural gas E&Ps. We're becoming a little bit more bullish on the oil side as well.
Okay, I like that, and I guess investors will like it too, especially if you are invested in those oil companies, oil service companies as well. You're definitely popping champagne right now. So, Fernando, I want to thank you for joining me today. I know the audience is getting a lot out of this. There's a lot of information that's moving. It's a very agile situation, but I know you're on top of it, and I hope to have you back very soon.
Thank you, Todd. Glad to be here. Happy New Year.
Likewise, and thank you, Fernando. So, on behalf of Fernando Valle, I am Todd Schoenberger. Thank you once again for joining us on the Money Path. We'll catch you next time. Take care. All right. That was great, Fernando.
Pleasure.
Yeah, you definitely